So, I just decided to watch Snow White for no reason with a friend of mine, and oh my gosh, this is bad. This has to be Disney's worst movie so far. And I knew this was going to be bad, but I didn't know it was going to be this bad. Like, oh my gosh, this movie. What is this movie? Like, it's clearly not Snow White because it takes elements from the original, but then drastically changes it at the same time. Now, if you don't want to hear spoilers, if you're somehow intrigued in this movie and still want to see it, go ahead. This is a spoiler warning. Get off the video, go watch the movie. But here we go. This movie was so unbelievably frustrating. So the movie opens up with the classic story that the original had, where it was talking about the king and queen, which in the movie, they mentioned the queen first in the movie because diversity reasons, even though king is generally the person who is in charge of the kingdom. Like, let's say if the heir to the throne at the time was a queen, and she got married, the king would instantly take her place. That's how it worked. And I don't know why they started with the queen and then the king. It makes no sense. And then they mention how they had a child, and on the way when the child was born, there was like some snowstorm, and they called her Snow White, even though in the original source material, she was called Snow White because her skin was as white as snow. And yes, I'm getting all my sources right before anyone goes like, you're getting your sources wrong. No, I watched the original movie and the new one at the same time. So I remembered what the source material or the Disney adaptation source material was like. And then it tells us about the happy times that they had, and then the mom died. And then, of course, the king marries Gal Gadot's queen, which I'm going to say it, and I think everybody agrees with me. Gal Gadot is still more attractive than Rachel Zegler in every way. But continuing on, then the dad decides to go for the field of battle and leaves Snow White behind to make sure that she's safe while he goes into the field of battle. And then he never returns, and of course, the evil queen makes everything bad, turns Snow White into a servant to do some cleaning, which then we have a transition with a song, and it goes from the little Snow White to Rachel Zegler, and you get to meet this one guy who is stealing from the palace, and Rachel Zegler's like, stealing is wrong, and the guy's like, well, we're poor and we need some stuff. And Rachel Zegler's Snow White is like, let me try talking to the queen, which then we get this whole scene of the queen and Rachel Zegler talking about the times. She mentions how she and her parents used to grab apples and make apple pie and give them to the village. We all know that's not true, Rachel Zegler. We know you ate all those pies. But anyway, they go back and forth, and then Gal Gadot is like, man, I don't remember you being so opinionated. And Rachel Zegler begs for forgiveness. And then immediately at the same time, the guards come in with the guy who was trying to steal from them, which apparently this guy was supposed to be the prince originally, but of course they changed it. They kept the same guy who did the prince in this movie, but they changed his role because, oh, we can't have a woman fall for a man. That's complete nonsense, guys. We need to have the woman stand strong. Screw men. And Gal Gadot's like, strip him bare and tie him to the gate so he freezes to death. And Rachel's like, that could kill him. And she's like, I don't care. And then we get this whole song moment from Rachel. I'm gonna say this. If you're not a big musical guy, let's say you for some reason think the original had way too much music, oh boy, you're in for a treat. That's all I'm gonna say until later on in the video. That's all I'm gonna say. But anyway, eventually Snow White finds, or I should say Rachel Zegler finds the guy, unties him, hands him a piece of bread, and he's off on his way. And then we transition to the mirror scene where Gal Gadot's like, mirror, mirror on the magic wall, who is the fairest of them all? And the mirror says Snow White, which we knew what was going to happen because we have to follow the source material to an extent, just not the way they want. So just like the original film, Gal Gadot has an assassin try to kill her. And while the assassin is trying to kill her, she's like picking apples and that jazz, just like the original movie, hanging out in nature. And of course, the guy cannot have the strength to kill her, which this made sense for the original because Snow White, and I'll get back to this more when we get to that part, was such a good character. But Rachel Zegler is not a good character. So I was just chanting on like, do it, do it, do it. Yeah, you could tell I have a lot of problems with this movie. I have not been this vocal on a rant in forever. That's how much I hate this movie. But anyway, of course, Rachel Zegler is set free by the hunter, and she meets up with this deer, which the deer shows her the way to the house of the 7 dwarves. And now we're going to get to a comparison between the original and the new one. So in this scene, in the original, Snow White went into the house, and the house was absolutely filthy. She did all of her time cleaning with the animals, making the house seem better, and then the dwarves come in, and then they're like, what the heck happened to our place? And then they find Snow White, and skeptical of her at first, but then grow to like her, except for Grumpy. And yeah, we don't get this in this movie. So when she goes into the house, she opens the door, the house is surprisingly not dirty, and then Rachel Zegler goes to the upper floors with all the dwarf beds and goes to sleep. I'm like, okay, they clearly cut out the part where she cleans the house because, oh, that's too toxic in masculinity to have a woman clean, even though it's a part of the original source material. So then, of course, we get to meet up with the dwarves who are walking through the forest, and then they go into a cave where apparently this version of Snow White, the dwarves have magical powers, which is complete nonsense. Because that was not in the source material, not even in the book, I'm pretty sure. I've never read the book, but for the most part, it's pretty accurate except a few small things that they changed. Continuing on, then they keep singing like how they did in the original movie. I noticed some different lyrics, if I'm not mistaken. Like, they added lyrics to the original song. And of course, this version of that song feels very stretched out, like a lot of the music in this movie. But anyway, they finish their shift, they go back to the house, and they try to go to sleep, but then they notice something is in their bed. And, of course, the dwarves start running, and, of course, Dopey is left behind while the other dwarves are hiding, which I might as well bring this up. This CGI dwarf, all of them, they're awful. Like, why? Like, why is everything else live action, But why aren't the dwarves, like, real people? It makes no sense. Like, we all know what happened with the dwarves. Let me recount it if you don't know. Here, you can skip to this time if you already know. So, what happened was, when they were making this movie, Peter Dinklage opened his big mouth, surprisingly for a short guy. I'm canceled. But anyway, continuing on, he opened his big mouth, which then they decided, hey, instead of the dwarves, how come we have these diversity people instead? And, of course, this became a big uproar, especially for the people that are actually this size. I remember seeing an interview of a guy being upset at Peter Dinklage for saying that, even though he has been playing dwarf characters forever. And now you suddenly have a problem with it. Just shut up, Peter Dinklage. You were good as Scourge. And Peter Dinklage is a good actor, but of course, like the rest of Hollywood, he's an idiot. So yeah, I blame Peter Dinklage for all of this. But anyway, continuing on, Dopey goes by Snow White, and she screams at Dopey, and Dopey is running away because how freaked out she is, which I'll give Rachel Zegler credit if I saw this. Dwarf 2? I would probably scream as well. But anyway, Rachel Zegler then goes by Dopey, and it's like, don't worry, I was just not expecting that. It's okay, even though you literally screamed in his face. Then the other dwarfs decide to take action and try to deal with her. And then they make the comment, oh, she's a human. And she's like, yeah, what do you think I was? And you're like, nothing. And then Grumpy is like, a ghost. And then after that, we find out some interesting context that they haven't interacted with humans for like 100 and something years. I can't remember the exact number. If you remember the exact number, can you tell me in the comments? Because I really don't remember. It was 100 and something years ago. And it turns out these humans are doing this stuff for the king, which of course, because of that stuff that apparently is affecting the dwarves want nothing to do with her. And then also Grumpy is like, you're with the evil queen, because she mentioned she's Snow White. And she's like, I gotta go. And Grumpy's like, knew it. And then the other dwarves is like, no, stay. But then we transition back to Gal Gadot's evil queen, where she's like, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror's like, still Snow White, basically what he said. And she's like, but she's dead. And he's like, she still lives. And, of course, she opens the box and she pulls out an apple. Which, man, I should have saw this coming. Disney is too much of a coward to do what the original story said. Because in the original, both the book and the movie, the 1930s movie, it was a pig's heart that the hunter gave her to pretend that he did the job. I cannot believe that Gal Gadot would be so stupid enough to confuse an apple with a human heart. How does that make any sense? And now I could see some Disney shill coming in, even though I think there's a lot of shills who don't like it either, going like, but maybe she didn't open the box. Which I'm going to say, if she didn't open the box before, that means she is stupid. Because it seems like that would be in her character to make sure that what the hunter was tasked to do was successful. Now, yes, it was a pig's heart in the original, but she probably still checked the box to make sure, because let's say if there was no heart, yeah, that hunter would be screwed. I mean, he's screwed regardless, but still. So eventually Evil Queen finds out, and she comes to the hunter, and she's like, you were supposed to kill her. And of course, he just denies the allegations, and who knows what happens to him after that. I honestly can't even remember. That's how much I did not like this movie. But anyway, we go back to the dwarves, who are, of course, doing their usual antics, and Snow White is having them clean and do a musical number. Now, here's another difference between the original and the new one. So, in the original, in this part of the movie where the dwarves are cleaning, Snow White is actually helping. Rachel Zegler is just doing a music number. Like, she wants to clean but have the dwarves do all the work. At least she was helping in the original. Like, what the heck? And then also, before they start cleaning, the dwarves do some antics which involved Dopey getting, like, stuff on his face, like, his face into the bowl, and then him running off like a little child, and Snow White is having this dramatic moment with Dopey, and she is saying that, is this pretty much the way it usually goes? And Dopey's like, yeah. Well, of course, Dopey can't talk in this version, which is accurate to the source material, the original Disney movie. And she teaches him how to whistle, and she says that whistling will eventually help you build up your voice. And he's doing this whistling. Then she comes back in where the dwarves are having an argument, and she decides to do psychological therapy with the dwarves. Does not feel like Snow White at all. This feels like one of those positivity meetings that you would do with your job. You know those meetings. It's like, and how does this person feel? And Grumpy is like that he's the only smart one and he doesn't feel like anyone listens to him, which then gets to a whole thing of them working together. Then they begin to clean, have the musical number, yada yada yada. And then they decide to go into the forest where, who does Snow White meet up with? The guy from earlier, the guy who tried stealing. And, of course, they're kind of bickering a bit, but then getting along. And there's even a comment that the guy makes saying, ooh, look at Snow White being mean. And then they break down into a musical number. Now, I'm going to say this. What was Disney thinking? Like, the amount of songs in this movie is completely outrageous. Like, there are more songs in this movie, more than the original. Like, what the heck? And they're not even good songs either. These have to be the most worst Disney songs in existence. Well, there was not a single banger in this soundtrack. It is all bad. And then the song number is interrupted by the hunters or the workers for the king, which it turns out that the guys who did the hunters were originally the people who were supposed to be the replacements for the dwarves. I mean, cool, they got to keep their roles, I guess, but at the same time, I really don't care. So, Snow White and them start talking and arguing, and then, of course, the royal guards from the palace come in, and we get a cool action scene. Of course, being sarcastic, of course. We get an action scene of the guards and Snow White and the soldiers fighting. And eventually, the love interest gets shot by a crossbow by one of the guards. And of course, we have this whole fake out and he acts like he's gonna die. And then one of the guys that they just met up with is like, we need to get him to a doctor, which then they go back to the dwarves, and it is just jarring to see a actual dwarf who is in this gang of humans and the CGI dwarves together. Why didn't you just stick with getting dwarf actors? Oh my gosh. So, of course, Doc is trying to help this random guy that I forgot the name to, and he's okay. And, of course, Snow White's like, it's time to rise up and take down the evil queen, which then we go back to the evil queen, and she, of course, is doing what the original source material did. And she is prepping the evil apple, or I should, my bad, poison apple, which is the true hero of the story, is Poison Apple. And you're the only hope for us, Poison Apple. You're the only hope. So then, before the poison apple, I did forget to mention, the evil queen makes herself old and disgusting, kind of like the original, but somehow the old and disgusting version of Gal Gadot is still more attractive than Rachel Zegler. Now that is just sad. And then we transition back to Snow White, where eventually, at some point, the dwarves and the soldiers, or the bounty hunters, I don't remember, I don't care, go out into the forest. But then, of course, the evil queen meets up with her, and she is trying to have Snow White eat the poison apple, and of course, because the guy, I forgot to mention, the guy that she sung a song with and tried stealing from the kingdom, yeah, he decided to go back to give the evil queen a message because it was time for her to rise up. And the evil queen gives Rachel the necklace, and Rachel's like, I gotta go save him because this story isn't about true love, it's about being a leader. Even though that's not what the original story was about. But continuing on, instead of talking about how much of a classic the original was, she, of course, or Rachel Zegler, of course, gets convinced to eat the poison apple, and she starts to feel weird. And then the evil queen reveals herself, which was not a part of the original source material, and opens the question. I remember saying this when I watched this movie illegally with a friend. I'm like, wait, if you were going to reveal yourself, what was the point of disguising yourself? Like, if you were just going to reveal who did it, like, you shouldn't have done that in the first place, and you should have had someone else do it. Like, I know that people in your kingdom probably won't do it. Like, you have magic. Just use magic powers to control their brain or something. This is so unbelievably stupid. So, then she passes out like the original, but of course it's outside instead of inside the house. And the dwarves at the same time, with the help of the animals, are returning to help Snow White. And of course, just like the original movie, they're preparing a funeral for her. But then the so-called love interest, thief guy, I'm going to call him thief guy, kisses Snow White on the cheek instead of the lips like the original source material. Originally, I called him out for being an absolute chump, but then I remembered, oh wait, it's Rachel Zegler, completely justified. Yeah, I know, I'm being mean in this review, but this movie is awful. I'm justified to being mean. Then suddenly she wakes up, and then all the people that Snow White has rallied are ready to go fight the evil queen. And then we get the worst part of the movie, or one of the worst parts of the movie. Dopey then talks out of nowhere. Like, why? Like, this is not how this works. And, like, Dopey is kind of a representation, even though I hate using that word, of people on the spectrum. Because there are some people on the spectrum who can't talk. And, like, You can't just simply wish your disability away. That's stupid. And now I could see some Disney show going like, oh, but the original Dopey is a stereotype of disability people. We need to be more nice. Even though there are actual people with disabilities who can't talk. I've met some of them. But, of course, we can't represent them, even though we claim that we're representative and accepting of all different cultures and disabilities and all that. And then they do this. Like, it shows that Disney really doesn't care about diversity. But, of course, you're gonna have your idiots going like, Disney cares about rights of disability people and diverse people and women and yada, yada, yada. It is just a disgrace. And I can't believe they did that. But anyway, Rachel and her team start going back to the castle, where then all the villagers decide to go and back her up, even though she's in this really fancy dress and everyone's in rags, and everyone's going, or something like that. And Rachel starts singing once again. And then Gal Gadot comes out, and it's like this final showdown, and Rachel's like, it's time to show you what we're like. That's not her exact words, but I really don't care. And Gal Gadot's like, oh, if you want to have this kingdom be nice, then you need to kill me. She grabs like a glass dagger, and she gives it to Snow White, puts it in her hands, and puts it right in front of her, which is a stupid idea. Like, even if the person's pure or not, like, you're giving the enemy an opportunity to kill you. Like, I know that this isn't the first media to do that, but in other stuff, it's completely justified and earned, because the actual characters themselves in those situations actually have a soul, where I really don't see Snow White and Rachel Zegler. I just see Rachel Zegler, and she's weird. So then, of course, she backs out because she wants to seem like the good guy. So Gal Gadot takes the dagger and tells one of the soldiers to kill her with the same dagger she gave Rachel Zegler. And, of course, this is one of the soldiers who was a farmer, which I forgot to mention. Gal Gadot's Evil Queen also drafted farmers to be soldiers. And then, to add insult to injury, this one farmer guy, Rachel Zegler, is like, remember when you used to allow people to come into your farm and pick the crops? He's like, I remember. Which then the farmer completely cowards out, and man, Disney does not understand farmers. Just because they're not like war veterans or anything like that, even though I think there are some farmers who are war veterans, just because they're a farmer doesn't mean they're a weakling. Like, I've met farmers that are tougher than this guy. My uncle is technically a farmer. He has chickens on his place. It's not like a big barn like every other farmer, but he has chickens, so he is technically a farmer. And also, I've worked a ranch before. Like, I worked at a ranch. And I know what these people are like. Like, this is stupid. This is the second time that Disney has made a soft farmer, even though farmers are way tougher than this. But anyway, after the farmer cowards out, she steals the blade to try to kill Rachel Zegler. But then one of the guys in the forest shoots the glass dagger out of her hands. And then she starts running into the castle to go by the mirror and it's like, mirror, mirror, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror's like, Snow White. And Snow White is the fairest of them all because she knows how to be kind and gentle. So then, of course, Gal Gadot, being jealous even though she is way more attractive than Rachel Zegler, smashes the mirror. And then the weirdest thing happens. She gets turned into this, like, glass material, and then she gets sucked into the mirror. I'm not kidding. Like, what the heck happened? Like, I'm glad that Gal Gadot wasn't crushed by a boulder like the original, but gosh darn it, this might be worse. And that's the end. And then the narrator's like, and then the kingdom became peaceful and the queen was great. And who is the narrator? Of course, it's Dopey. And then we end with the classic happily ever after. So the moral lesson is, kids, be a snobby little brat and you'll win the day. Let evil win is basically the plot. Alright, all jokes aside, this movie is awful. Like, this movie, I'm not even kidding. I thought this movie was going to be bad already, but I didn't know it was this bad. This is Disney's worst release. Everything else I said was Disney's worst release. That can go away now because this is absolutely terrible. What was this movie? It completely takes stuff from the source material, but then drastically changes it at the same time. Now, a princess rebelling against an evil queen sounds like a nice idea for a princess movie, just not this one. Also, the Snow White in this movie comes off as a jerk, like as I mentioned earlier. Not only did they cut out the scene where she cleans the house like the original, she also makes the dwarves clean where she sings a musical number. Like, when it came to that scene, I described it as like if your parents doing reverse psychology on you to do chores. And I think that's still pretty accurate. Like, what the heck? Like, if it wasn't bad enough that Rachel Zegler put a bad taste in our mouths to want to boycott this movie, it's a worst fate to watch this movie. Like, I absolutely hated this movie. This is the worst movie I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of bad movies over the years. Now, what would I have to rate this abomination? It's going to be harsh, which I think I'm justified of being harsh. It's 0 out of 10. 0. Like, this movie is really bad. And there's not a single redeeming thing. If there was a single redeeming thing, I would have given it like a 1 out of 10. But this movie, skip it. It's awful. Let this movie flop in the box office. You know, the only good part about this movie was the community bashing the trailers in the comments. They are the true heroes of this movie. I appreciate you, soldiers. You did your part to roast this absolute dumpster fire of a movie. You deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for your service. But that's my thoughts on Snow White. What did you think of it? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was awful? Tell me in the comments, and have a nice day, everyone.